Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper. The government of India has said that plasma therapy or convalescent plasma therapy is not an approved treatment for COVID-19. Around the world, there has been a lot of interest in using plasma therapy as a possible treatment against COVID-19. But the government of India has cautioned against its usage because the efficacy of plasma therapy against COVID-19 is still being tested out by the Indian Council of Medical Research, and these clinical trials are still at an experimental stage. So unless and until there is hard scientific proof that plasma therapy can be effective and safe against COVID-19, the government is not going to approve it because otherwise it could constitute a fatal risk to the patients. But this stand taken by the Union Health Ministry is quite interesting because just a few days back, the Union Health Minister had publicly advocated plasma therapy as a possible treatment. And even the Drug Controller General of India had given the go-ahead to ICMR to conduct clinical trials in order to test the effectiveness and safety of plasma therapy against COVID-19. In fact, it was not just the Union Health Minister, but even a few chief ministers and a few state governments had already started advocating plasma therapy as a treatment for COVID-19. So the article labels this stand of the government as a U-turn, and it shows that plasma therapy has not been proven to be effective and safe against COVID-19. So in this context, let's talk about convalescent plasma therapy that has been making news around the world. See, plasma or blood plasma is the yellowish liquid that is found in our blood, which carries the blood cells, including the white blood cells, that are generated by our body's immune system against an infection. So the antibodies produced by our immune system while fighting an infection can be found present in our blood plasma. And please remember that these antibodies are highly specific to each type of infection. Now let us see how plasma therapy works in case of COVID-19. Under this therapy, plasma from the blood of recovered COVID-19 patients is extracted, as this plasma is rich in antibodies that has been generated against COVID-19 by the immune system of the recovered patient. So by using the antibody-rich plasma from a recovered COVID-19 patient, it is theoretically possible to treat another infected patient by transfusing this antibody-rich plasma into the bloodstream of the infected patient. It is believed that the antibodies present in the blood of recovered COVID-19 patients can enable the immune system of another infected patient to fight against COVID-19 as well. In fact, this treatment has been tried against other infectious diseases as well, such as H1N1, MERS, etc. So that's the reason why convalescent plasma therapy is also referred to as passive immunization, as it can theoretically grant indirect immunity and help an infected person fight against infectious diseases such as COVID-19. But please remember that its effectiveness and safety has not been conclusively proven, and trials are going on around the world to assess the risks associated with plasma treatment. A recent study conducted by Johns Hopkins University has shown that plasma therapy carries the risk of spreading other infections such as HIV, hepatitis, etc. Since the therapy involves blood transfusion, there is a possibility of accidentally spreading other infections as well. This study has also shown that plasma therapy could increase the degree of infection in few patients by suppressing their natural immune system. This makes the patient all the more vulnerable to the disease, and this constitutes a fatal risk. So that's the reason why the Union Health Ministry has refused to approve plasma therapy as a treatment against COVID-19 unless and until there is conclusive scientific proof regarding its effectiveness and safety. Now let's take up the next article. The government of India has borrowed a loan of $1.5 billion from the Asian Development Bank under its CARES program. CARE stands for COVID-19 Active Response and Expenditure Support, and this is a dedicated financial support program of the ADB for its member countries. This borrowing happens to be India's largest ever borrowing from the Asian Development Bank, and this sum of $1.5 billion is expected to fund India's immediate response against the COVID-19 pandemic. It is expected to help India to deal with the health impact of the pandemic and as well as the socio-economic impact of the pandemic. The Indian government is expected to make use of this fund to scale up testing on the health side, and it is expected to use this fund to provide for social protection to around 80 crore people on the socio-economic side. Then the Indian government and the Asian Development Bank are holding further talks to fund a dedicated stimulus package for India's MSME sector and to provide health services for COVID-19 patients through public-private partnerships. See, the Indian government is trying to revive India's MSME sector, which has been the hardest hit by the pandemic, by working with the ADB. Through this financial support, ADB is expected to finance credit guarantee schemes for Indian MSMEs and help them integrate into the global and national value chains by funding the establishment of enterprise development centers. This proposed stimulus fund, sponsored by the ADB, is also expected to provide for a credit enhancement facility for infrastructure projects in India. Then India has also decided to take technical support from the Asian Development Bank for implementing the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana, under which the center is implementing a 1.7 lakh crore welfare package, which was recently announced after the lockdown. Now let us look at a few facts about the Asian Development Bank, which can be important for prelims. See, the Asian Development Bank was established in 1966 and it is headquartered in Manila, Philippines. As the name itself indicates, it is a development bank and its main objective is to promote social and economic development in Asia. As a part of its mandate, it is involved in promoting social welfare and the sustainable and inclusive development of the member countries that are located in the Asia Pacific region. But please remember that the membership of the Asian Development Bank is not restricted to countries that are located in the Asia Pacific region. The membership of ADB is open to all the members of the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and Pacific, which consists of all the countries in the Asia Pacific region, and the membership of ADB is also open to non-regional developed countries such as European countries. So it is not just the Asian countries which hold membership at the ADB, even countries such as United States, Germany, etc., even they hold membership at the ADB. In total, the Asian Development Bank has 68 member countries, and it also holds the official observer status at the United Nations. The organization structure of the ADB is modeled on that of the World Bank. The members of the ADB hold a capital share in the bank, and based on their shareholding, they enjoy a proportional voting right. Amongst all the member countries, it is Japan which holds the largest proportion of shares at 15.6%. So as a result, Japan exercises the highest amount of influence as far as decision making at the ADB is concerned. This is followed by the United States with a capital share of 15.5%, and China holds around 6.4% of the shares, and India holds around 6.3% of the shares. Then you should also know that amongst these 68 member countries, there are countries such as Japan, United States and Australia which contribute but they do not borrow from the bank. And there are also countries such as China and India which contribute to the capital share and as well as borrow from the bank. Then the ADB finances projects in the areas of education, environment, climate change, disaster risk management, finance sector development, infrastructure, which includes transportation, communication, energy, water, sanitation, and even urban development. The ADB also finances initiatives related to regional cooperation and integration. And the ADB also lends to the private sector as well. Then there are a couple of criticisms as well with regard to the functioning of ADB. The biggest criticism is that countries such as Japan and US, which hold the highest voting share, they exercise excessive influence with regard to decision making at the Asian Development Bank. So as a result, the other member countries do not get an equal say in the decisions that are made by the ADB. And the other criticism is that a number of decisions made by the ADB is heavily influenced by geopolitics. For example, China has a history of blocking ADB funding for Indian projects coming up in Arunachal Pradesh and Jammu and Kashmir. Now let's take up an editorial from page number 6. which analyzes the support measures announced by the RBI for mutual funds. See, mutual funds in India have increasingly come under liquidity pressure as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown. Especially debt funds, which is a type of a mutual fund, has come under increased pressure because more and more investors are redeeming their investments as a result of the pandemic. So the sudden increase in the redemption of investments by the investors, especially from debt funds, has placed a lot of liquidity pressure on the fund managers. Recently, a major mutual fund known as Franklin Templeton closed down 6 of its debt funds in order to preserve investor value and prevent these debt funds from crashing. So when Franklin Templeton decided to close down 6 of its debt funds, it was believed that it could have a contagion effect on all other mutual funds. The closure of 6 debt funds by Franklin Templeton posed considerable risk to other mutual funds because Franklin Templeton alone had around 26,000 crore worth of assets under its management. So if the RBI did not step in immediately and announce support measures, then all the other debt funds, which had around 15 lakh crore worth assets under management, would have been under risk. So in order to prevent this contagion effect and ease the liquidity pressure being faced by mutual funds, the RBI decided to step in immediately and it announced a special facility to inject around 50,000 crore rupees in liquidity for mutual funds. The RBI said that through this special facility, it would be carrying out a 90-day repo operation through which it would be lending around 50,000 crore rupees to commercial banks. And these banks in turn are expected to lend this money to mutual funds as loans in order to help them deal with the liquidity pressure. So the editorial appreciates the RBI for being proactive and for taking timely measures during this time of crisis. But the question is, will these commercial banks really take the risk of lending to mutual funds? Because see, commercial banks are already dealing with a large share of bad loans and non-performing assets. As a result of their increased exposure to bad loans, commercial banks have been hesitant to pass on the 50,000 crore liquidity support that was recently announced by the RBI to help out NBFCs overcome the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Just like the 50,000 crore special liquidity provided to mutual funds, the RBI had earlier announced a similar liquidity facility for NBFCs as well. Even in the case of NBFCs, it was up to the commercial banks to pass on this additional liquidity in order to help them overcome this economic crisis. But commercial banks have been hesitant to lend to NBFCs because they fear that this would increase their exposure to bad loans. Now the same could happen with regard to mutual funds as well and the special liquidity support that has been announced by the RBI. Even though RBI is willing to inject liquidity of 50,000 crore rupees that is specifically meant to help out mutual funds, commercial banks may be hesitant to give out these loans to mutual funds because as a result of the lockdown, the credit rating of most of the companies are expected to be downgraded, and this would be having a direct impact on the performance of mutual funds. So due to this increased risk being faced by mutual funds, commercial banks may be hesitant to lend out loans to mutual funds, and this might defeat the purpose of the liquidity support that has been announced by the RBI for mutual funds. So that's the reason why the editorial praises the RBI for its proactive and timely intervention, but it says that the success of this liquidity facility would be dependent on the willingness of commercial banks to lend to mutual funds. Now let's take up an article from page number 8. India has criticized and raised questions over this year's Global Terrorism Index. See, this index is brought out by the Institute for Economics and Peace, which is a think tank based out of Sydney, Australia. The Global Terrorism Index for 2019 has ranked India as the 7th worst terrorism affected country in the world. This poor ranking given by the Global Terrorism Index places India in the same bracket as that of Democratic Republic of Congo, South Sudan, Burkina Faso, Palestine and Lebanon. In fact, even countries such as Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Pakistan, Somalia and Nigeria are ranked ahead of India. So this is an unacceptable discrepancy in the index, and this has led Niti Aayog to question the methodology that has been adopted by the Institute for Economics and Peace while devising the Global Terrorism Index. India has even raised questions over the opaque sources of funding of the Institute for Economics and Peace. The reason why Niti Aayog has raised these concerns is because in March 2020, the Cabinet Secretariat had asked the Niti Aayog to keep track of around 32 global indices in order to evaluate India's performance and subsequently drive reforms and growth. Now let's take up another article from page number 8. In a significant ruling, the Supreme Court has said that even officials of a deemed university can be tried and punished under the Prevention of Corruption Act if they are involved in bribery and corruption. This ruling of the Supreme Court has expanded the definition of public servant as provided under the Prevention of Corruption Act. See, the objective of the Prevention of Corruption Act is to prevent the social evil of bribery and corruption and punish those public servants who are involved in bribery and corruption. In a traditional sense, the definition of public servant covers only those who are directly employed by the government. That is, as per the traditional definition of public servant, under the Prevention of Corruption Act, only government employees are supposed to be covered, and these provisions would not be applicable to private individuals, as in the case of officials of a deemed university. See, if you look at the Prevention of Corruption Act, we have Section 2 Clause C Subclause 11 that provides for the term university. Traditionally, this definition only covered state universities. So accordingly, officials of a state university were considered as public servants as well, and they would also be covered under the provisions of the Prevention of Corruption Act. But this narrow interpretation meant that officials of a deemed university would be exempted from the provisions of the Prevention of Corruption Act. But in this landmark ruling, the Supreme Court has expanded the definition of a public servant by covering the officials of a deemed university as well. According to the Supreme Court, deemed universities that have been set up under the UGC Act of 1956 would also fall under the Prevention of Corruption Act, and officials working at these deemed universities shall be considered as public servants because, at the end of the day, even these officials of a deemed university are carrying out a common public duty just like any other public servant. Through this ruling, the Supreme Court has moved beyond the traditional definition of a public servant, which meant only government employees, and it has said that any individual who is seen to be performing a public duty can be considered as a public servant when it comes to enforcing the provisions of the Prevention of Corruption Act, which has been designed to curb the social evil of bribery and corruption. Now let's take up another article from page number 8. The United States Commission on International Religious Freedom has downgraded India to the lowest ranking, and it has placed India amongst countries of particular concern in its 2020 report. See, the US Commission on International Religious Freedom is an independent federal government commission of United States, and it has been established through the International Religious Freedom Act. It functions as an advisory body, and it is responsible for studying religious freedom in countries around the world. Based on this evaluation of international religious freedom, the Commission can make recommendations to the US President, to the Secretary of State, to the US Congress, etc. It can point out to them in which countries religious freedom is being violated with the support of the government. It can even go to the extent of asking the US President and the US Congress to take action against these countries, including the imposition of sanctions. So this Commission of the United States is basically responsible for studying religious freedom, minority rights and minority welfare around the world, and it can even recommend the steps that need to be taken by the US government and the US Congress. So this commission has ranked India as a tier 2 country, and it has placed India in the same category as that of China, North Korea, Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. This is the first time that India has been ranked in this category since 2004. And the reason why India's ranking has been downgraded for 2019 is because of the controversial Citizenship Amendment Act, the current situation in Jammu and Kashmir, the proposed National Register of Citizens, and the deterioration of minority rights, especially that of Muslims in India. Being ranked as a tier 2 country by this commission means that minority rights are being violated with the indirect support of the government, and the government is failing to take action against this. The Government of India has responded to this controversial report, and it has said that it is a biased report which does not represent ground realities. The government has rejected this report by blaming the commission for misrepresenting facts on the ground. Now let's take up the practice questions. Which of the following statements are correct? The Maha Kumbh Mela is celebrated in a cycle of approximately 12 years at 4 riverbank pilgrimage sites, which includes Allahabad or Prayagraj, located at the confluence of the Ganga, Yamuna and the Saraswati river, Haridwar, located on the banks of the Ganga river, Nashik, located on the banks of Godavari river, and Ujjain, located on the banks of Shipra river. It has been inscribed on the UNESCO's representative list of intangible cultural heritage of humanity. Both the statements are correct. Option C is the right answer. This question has been asked because we have an article on page number 1 which refers to the upcoming Haridwar Kumbh Mela, which is all set to be held in January 2020. The Maha Kumbh Mela, which is referred to as the world's largest peaceful gathering, requires massive arrangements, especially with regard to toilets, sanitation, etc. Accordingly, arrangements are being made by the government of Uttarakhand, the National Mission for Clean Ganga, and the Union Water Ministry. But of course, the question of organizing the Haridwar Maha Kumbh Mela would be dependent on how the COVID-19 pandemic is going to pan out in the coming months. Now let's take up the next practice question. Which of the following is considered as the traditional occupation of the Bavaria community? The correct answer is option B, hunting. This question has been asked because we have an article on page number 4 according to which animal poaching and hunting has registered a sharp increase in Rajasthan as a result of the lockdown. Animals such as the chinkaras, the black bucks, peacocks and the grey francolins, which have been listed as endangered species under the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972, have been hunted, and it has been suspected that the Bavaria community, whose traditional occupation is to hunt, could be responsible for these hunting and poaching incidents. See, the Bavaria community is an ethnic group that is found in Rajasthan, parts of Haryana, Punjab, etc. The traditional occupation of this community during the medieval times was hunting. The article also makes a reference to Amrita Devi and the Bishnoi community and their role in environment conservation. But I have already covered this topic in detail on the 9th of September 2019, so kindly go back and watch this analysis for more information on the Bishnoi community and Amrita Devi. Now let's take up the next practice question. Which of the following statements are correct? The Indian Home Rule movement served as an inspiration for the Irish Home Rule movement. In 1920, the All India Home Rule League elected Mahatma Gandhi as its president. In 1921, All India Home Rule League changed its name to Swarajya Sabha. Amongst the given statements, the first statement is incorrect. See, the Indian Home Rule movement, which was active between 1916 and 1921, was started by Annie Besant and Bal Gangadhar Tilak. The Indian Home Rule League, led by Bal Gangadhar Tilak, was focused on Maharashtra, Karnataka and few other parts in western and southern India, whereas the Home Rule League under Annie Besant was focused on all the other parts of India. This Home Rule movement, which was born in India, was actually inspired by the Irish Home Rule League and not the other way round as given in this statement. This Home Rule movement was championing the cause of self-rule or Swaraj, and in 1920, Mahatma Gandhi was elected as its president. But after 1918, the Indian Home Rule movement started declining because the leaders of the Home Rule movement had stepped aside, and by this time, the ideology of Mahatma Gandhi had started to gain popularity. So after losing its popularity, the All India Home Rule League was renamed as the Swarajya Sabha in 1921. So amongst the given statements, the first statement is incorrect, whereas statements 2 and 3 are correct. So option C is the right answer. This question has been asked because on page number 8, the article 100 years ago refers to the election of Mahatma Gandhi as the president of the All India Home Rule League. Now let's take up the next practice question. Which of the following statements are correct? South Asian Seasonal Climate Outlook Forum, or SASCOF, was established in 2010 as a platform where national meteorological agencies from the SAARC countries along with Myanmar could discuss some of the common weather and climate related matters. All these South Asian countries, except for Afghanistan, experience common weather and climatological characteristics such as the southwest monsoon. It is supported by the World Meteorological Organization and the Regional Integrated Multi-Hazard Early Warning System or RIMES for the Africa and Asia region. All the three statements are correct. Option D is the right answer. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 11, the spatial forecast of this year's monsoon provided by the South Asia Seasonal Climate Outlook Forum predicts a dry monsoon season for farmers in the Deccan Plateau. Now let's take up the next practice question. Which of the following statements are correct? India was not a founding member of BRICS and joined the organization in 2010. The primary focus of the organization is to promote cooperation in disaster management and counter-terrorism. New Development Bank and Contingent Reserve Arrangement are some of its notable initiatives. Amongst the given statements, the first and the second statements are incorrect. Because see, India was a founding member of BRICS when it was established in 2009. It was South Africa which later joined in 2010. Even though BRICS is involved in disaster management and counter-terrorism, its primary focus has always been to promote economic cooperation amongst the member countries and to reform the global financial architecture by challenging the monopoly of the Western countries in global financial institutions such as the World Bank and the IMF. It was in response to this monopoly of the Western countries with regard to global financial architecture that BRICS established the New Development Bank to counter the World Bank and the Contingent Reserve Arrangement to counter the IMF. So the correct answer is option D, 3 only. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 11, India's Foreign Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar has called upon the BRICS member countries to help out private entrepreneurs to overcome the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now let's take up the next practice question. What does biological oxygen demand and chemical oxygen demand help in? The correct answer is it will help in indicating water quality based on the amount of oxygen necessary to break down organic and inorganic pollutants. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 11, water quality in the Ganga river has not seen any significant improvement even during the lockdown period. But the pause in industrial activity has helped improve water quality in the Yamuna river but not in the Ganga river. The article makes a reference to biological oxygen demand and chemical oxygen demand and how they can help in indicating the amount of oxygen that is required to break down organic and inorganic pollutants. These indicators basically indicate the health of the river. For a more detailed understanding of biological oxygen demand and chemical oxygen demand, kindly go back and watch our analysis for the 27th of Feb 2020. Now let's take up a practice question from the 2019 prelims paper. Which of the following statements are correct about the deposits of methane hydrate? Global warming might trigger the release of methane gas from these deposits. Large deposits of methane hydrate are found in the Arctic tundra and under the seafloor. Methane in atmosphere oxidizes to carbon dioxide after a decade or two. All the three statements are correct. Option D is the right answer. Finally, let's take up a couple of mains practice questions. The first question, discuss the external borrowing options being availed by India to tide over the COVID-19 crisis. The second question, mutual funds in India have come under increased liquidity pressure as a fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic. In this context, evaluate the measures being taken by the RBI. So kindly write an answer to these questions and post them in the comment section below. I hope this has been a useful session and do let us know your feedback in the comment section below. So this concludes our discussion for the day. Thanks for watching.